Rangers fans, welcome to season 3 of Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney alongside Nick Zararis. And Nick, we are through the first 2 weeks of the season. Rangers have a 4-0-1 start. Record is pretty all right.
I mean, you can only win the games you play, like we were just talking about, being that the Rangers have only played 5 games over the course of 2 weeks. There's not nearly as much to dissect or involve. It's hard to get a feel for where certain guys might be at, where certain lines and pairs might be at, especially considering the fact that they do have a bit of turnover and they are trying some guys out who might not necessarily be here all year, and guys like Mancini, Edstrom, Rempe. We'll see what the long-term vision is for that third pair with Jones, Ruedel, Mancini, who I just mentioned, but they're playing the games they're in. Shesterkin continues to be enough to mitigate their defensive issues. They're scoring enough on the power play to offset some of their 5-on-5 issues. They're a good hockey team. I mean, we spent a lot of time on last week's show talking about, can you guys all try some stuff? And they tried some stuff. I don't think you want Chad Ruedel as an every game third pair defenseman, but I think if he draws in once every other week or so and gives one of those younger guys, whether it's Mancini or Jones, a little bit of a reprieve, I think that's fine. I think we're getting closer on Lindgren, who still has a few more days before he's eligible to come off of LTIR, but they're going to keep winning games, man. Toronto, for all of their talent, never really felt like they were in that firm of control of that game. I know
The
Shesterkin.
third period, though, that
Well,
was a
yeah,
little
the
different.
Rangers had a lead, though, so it's
Yeah.
not that big of a. And the other thing with that is the Rangers always historically have played Toronto well. I mean, you can point to that like 50 save shutout Georgiev had like 4 or 5 years ago. For whatever reason, the way the Rangers play always gives Toronto a hard time. Good wins against Detroit, both games. Detroit, not a very good hockey team, not very fast, and made the Rangers look fast, which is kind of hard to do. But there's not a whole lot to really dissect or pick apart here. The results are pretty straightforward. Panarin's line is doing what we've expected. The third line, like we said in our season preview, would be good on paper, and it's delivered. It's been their best line at 5-on-5. Riley Smith looks reasonably well enough, and Miller and Fox is working very well. And the other two pairs, though, underwater on the metrics, they are not losing the minutes in terms of actual goals. So there's stuff to improve on, but this is a pretty good first 2 weeks, all things considered. It'd be nice if there were more games so we could dissect more.
Sure.
Other than that, there's not really a whole lot to complain about. That we need more games.
Well, good news, Nick, is that we have one whole game today. We have one whole game on Wednesday, neither of which the Rangers play on. So that'll be very, very fun to watch that one single game and then just call it a night. But yeah, I mean, the third period aside from that Leafs and Rangers
But
experience, what
they
was
had
it
the
on
lead,
Saturday?
so it's
I
different.
I
They're going
understand.
to absorb a
Listen,
lot of pressure with a lead.
I
That's just the
I
nature
I
of hockey.
understand that, but at Shesterkin played. I mean, he was outstanding. If you didn't think he was worth $12 million before, I just and you still don't think he's worth $12 million after what he did, some
Well,
of the
no, it's
saves that he
rubles,
made.
Andrew. I don't know if you heard or not, but it's rubles
Uh,
Shesterkin's looking for, not dollars. I don't know if you're
right,
familiar.
right. Like I that those people like we just can't help anymore. Like what does Shesterkin have to do? He's already won a Vesna. He looks this great, and it's October. What else does he possibly have to do for those people to turn around and say, you know what, he is worth that kind of money? Because like at a certain point, he for those 20 minutes, he stood on his head and he secured the win for the Rangers, literally by mostly by himself in that third. What else does he need to do for you to be like, you know what? Give him the money, he's earned it. At this point, I'm not really sure. But against Detroit, yeah, the Rangers are just a simply better team. So these are the kinds of games that if they lost, you'd be like, but they should be beating those teams. What's going on? Thankfully, the Rangers not only are playing who's in front of them, but they're beating the teams they're supposed to beat. And that's how you get to 50, 53, 55 wins is you can only play who's in front of you, and you have to beat the bad teams. Like you're not playing 82 games of the Panthers, the Bruins, the Devils, the Jets. Like you're not playing these top teams every single night. You are playing the bad teams as well with mixed in there. And if you know If you don't get the points against the bad teams, okay, well then you have to essentially force to get the points against the good teams. And that's all, I could say these things, oh, just get the points. So it's easy to do that. But when you're a team like the Rangers, it should be relatively easy for you to get points against teams like Detroit because you are simply a better team than them on a on paper basis, on ice performance basis. You are a much better team. So the fact that they won those two games relatively easily as well, that's a good sign. They played well for two periods against Toronto before their full out attack made the Rangers kind of play on their heels a little bit, but all in all, from the first 5 games, Utah side, because they played not a whole lot of defense in that game. For 4 out of the 5 games, for the most part, they've looked good, and that's a good sign.
I think it's really easy to fall into the trap, especially because they're not playing a lot of games right now, to talk about it like it's football, where we only have 5 games. So each game has kind of an outsized importance. And I think it's
Sure.
important to look at it through the lens of trends of what is and isn't working. And so far, they really might have something with Fox and Miller. I really like the way they play off of each other. And I do think it creates question marks for the rest of their lineup. We spent a lot of time on last week's show talking about what that decision ultimately comes down to and how it's going to impact everything else. But the fact that that pair has viability, the fact that it's gotten ice time a little bit with each of the first three forward lines, and it's gotten the best results playing with the Kako line, who, for all of the problems in Kako's development, his deployment, his usage over the years, the board stuff, the winning puck battles, the forcing turnovers, that's never really been in question. His decision making as far as playmaking, when to drive the net, shoot, that stuff is fair game to critique. But in the role he's in right now, him and Cooley are being put in a great position to succeed because they are being asked to do what they are good at. And this is something I have always believed in. It's something that, regardless of sport, rings true. If you ask a fish to climb a tree, you're going to have a hard time. If you ask a fish to swim, the fish is going to do really well at swimming. Putting Kako with Zibanejad and Kreider last year, the results were not bad. The problem was he is not a trigger man. He is not going to score a ton of goals. He is going to help you a lot defensively. He's going to give you offensive zone time. He's going to win puck battles. He's going to keep the puck on your stick. And in the role he's in now, where him and Cooley are effectively just out there to forecheck and then occupy space on the flanks because Hedl draws defenders towards him because he's the best shooter of the three, it naturally creates a healthy dynamic between those three where everybody knows what they need to do and they do their job. It's not a case of Kako being asked to play on a scoring line where he's probably a little bit out of his depth based on his shooting talent. They're not asking him to go and score 20, 25 goals this year. He might only end up with 12 or 13 goals this year, but if they dominate those minutes the way they have been so far, they're 5 goals for, no goals against through the first 2 weeks of games. They've got 60 some odd percent of the high danger chances, 50 something percent of the regular chances. This is a really good line that has really good mechanics, and it's a good example of what we always talk about, that you need a variety of players with different skill sets, because so much of the last 3 years, the Rangers' issues have been they have a lot of guys who are good at hockey, but they all do similar things, and it becomes very redundant, and it's easy to anticipate them based on their tendencies. And this line, the way they play, it's very different from the way the Rangers top 6 plays, in that they are
Right.
not a transition team. They are good at dump and chase. They do want to win puck battles. They will outwork you. They will win those battles and use positioning to take advantage. And it just makes the Rangers all the more dangerous. The more variety you have, the better. And look, the first 2 lines, possession wise, haven't been great. They're a little bit underwater in terms of metrics. They're winning on actual goals, but the Rangers so far are showing you exactly what you expected. They've got a nice collection of talent. They definitely have some things to work out, but through the lens of that third line, the potential's here. The potential for a really good regular season again, and not just like a 42, 43, like a 50 win regular season is not out of the question. And again, they got to play more games. The schedule is very slow out of the gate so far. we'll see. They get Toronto's a good first serious opponent to take on. I want to see how they handle some of the teams they've historically struggled against. But so far, I like what I've seen from the third line, and Miller and Fox are better than advertised. So at least as far as like giving me something to be excited about, something to care about, we've got a little bit more than we usually do this early in the season.
I mean, I agree, and we've only been not just us. People, a lot of people have been clamoring for Miller Fox for
3 or 4
years
years now, yeah.
at this point. So thankfully, finally, we've seen it, and not only have we seen it, the results are looking good. And I think both things can be true about Capo Caco. I think you can be, disappointed, upset at Capo Caco never being the second overall phenom talent that is expected of a player taken at that high of a caliber, but you can also, be reasonably happy at the things that he does well. A lot of people that argue, "Oh, you should trade Kaga, you should, move him for somebody else." The thing about people that say that is those people never provide a reasonable name in return. If you want to trade Capo Caco, and I'm not saying that he's untouchable. Obviously, in the right trade, you can make that happen. But if you want to trade Capo Caco, it has to be for somebody that makes sense.
It has to be for
And
someone who's going to play as well. It can't
yeah,
just be for a
of
prospect.
course, yeah. It can't. Well, the Rangers aren't going to do that anyway because Cabo Caco occupies a top 9 spot, and also Laviolette and the entire Rangers staff can trust Cabo Caco to play in a top 6 role if they if they are desperate and need him to do that. It's not ideal, but he's done that in the past, so he has the runway with them to do that if need be. But if you want to trade Capo Caco, not only do you need to replace the skill set that he does have, but also name me a guy that does what he does that's also as young as he is and also as cheap as he is. Like it takes two to tango. Saying trade Kako is a very ethereal statement. Like, yeah, I mean, if there's a good trade on the table that makes the team better, that involves Capo Kako leaving the team, you definitely entertain that. But you can't just trade this guy for a bag of chips or whatever you want to do. And then his skill set, which is vital on that third line, like you mentioned, the puck battles, a lot of the board stuff he's good at, the board battles. He leaves with that. And you got to find somebody to not only replace that, but also someone who's same age, say around the same money, because Rangers don't have a lot of it right now, that can do that, but also do more. And there's a different team that's looking to move somebody that's better than Kako and get Kako in return. We have to be realistic here. Capo Kako, yes, isn't the second overall talent that people wanted, and you can be it's reasonable to be disappointed at that. But the things that he does well are a positive force on this team when he's on the ice. When he's with Hedel and Cooley, that third line is not only dangerous, the other team has difficulty sustaining offensive zone pressure. And that's exactly what you want your third line to do. Not only can they defend well, but they also, have reasonable attacks offensively as well. They're a good two-way line. You can't just say, oh, get him out. Okay, but for who? For who? Whomst? Whomst would you like in return? That's the kind of question you got to ask yourself.
And we know hockey GMs aren't very creative. We don't really see that all that often in trade hockey player for hockey player trade. We don't see that all that often. And it's a lack of creativity and it's a lack of familiarity. You know what Kako is at this point. Do I think they probably could get more out of him if he got more minutes, played with better offensive players? Yeah, probably could get. He had 18 goals a couple of years ago. He's not an untalented or useless hockey player. He's better than some of the other guys who have gone in that range who haven't really worked out. You'd take him over Yamamoto, you take him over Puljujarvi. A lot. There are guys in that archetype. The big in Puljujarvi's case, the big plotting, board battling, not the best skater type. But you take Kako over a lot of those other flameouts because
people act like Kako has went the Scott Gomez route of just not scoring for over a year. Like he's not as bad as some people like to say.
No, he's not. He's not, and it comes from a misunderstanding. identifying the skill set and how to apply the skill set that's the trick here. Anybody can watch, but the thing I always say is people watch different things when they're watching hockey. A lot not everyone watches it the same way, and you're not looking at the same things. I'm not looking at the puck all that often. I am watching the play develop around, and more often than not, it's the guys who are in the spot half a second before the puck gets there that are the ones that are making the plays. No, if you take a guy second overall, you expect him to be a consistent 60, 70 point forward, if not more than that. Is he that? No. Is he
Yeah.
relatively inexpensive? Yeah, he had to take a prove it deal because of the environmental factors that precluded him from racking up stats, being injury and playing time. So for at least one more year, they could do worse in that spot. They have done worse in that spot. This is as good an opening of the season roster the Rangers have had in a really long time.
And it's
Even
gonna get better.
in theory, yes.
Right.
It depends if VZ's going to come back in as a full timer, what they do, Edstrom, Rempe, what they do as far as Lindgren, who goes down. I imagine it'll be Mancini, and Ruedel and Jones are going to get a lot of volleying back and forth based on opponent. I think they feel Ruedel's a lot better defensively, and that was the logic for putting him in against Toronto. I have no real qualms about that, but like I said Saturday morning when I saw that Ruedel was one of the first guys off at practice, we're going on what, year 4 of Zach Jones in the organization,
Yeah.
third year on the periphery of the NHL. At a certain point, the exact same principle we've talked about with Keandre Miller over the last couple of weeks, last couple of months. At a certain point, he is what he is, and the less continuity you give him, whether it be partner, deployment, playing time, the harder it's going to be for him to figure it out. It's the same thing we said. We spent 20 minutes talking about Rempe last week. If you want to see if he's a guy or not, he's got to play, whether that's here or whether that's in Hartford. And now I understand it's a little bit different with sending guys down because certain guys, once you reach an age grad, you got to go through waivers. But for as far as the decisions they are making, they're making sense. This is not how they came out of the gate 2 years ago, where after they beat Tampa Bay, they lost to Tampa Bay in the conference final, and they came into the season, it was just off. And that feeling stayed the entire regular
Yeah.
season. They would string together a couple nice periods. They definitely won plenty of games, but it never really had that connectivity, that intuitiveness that you need from a successful hockey team. And it's very early right now. A lot of teams are still really working out kinks. It's just good to see that the Rangers aren't as far behind as some of these other teams that are really struggling out of the gate,
Right.
whether it's Colorado, whether it's Nashville, whether it's Edmonton, whether it's Vegas. Vegas better record than those three, but all of those teams fancy themselves as legitimate Stanley Cup contenders the way the Rangers do. The Rangers are not setting themselves behind the 8 ball the way those teams I just mentioned are in the struggles. And some of them, you can't predict injuries. You can only do so much to avoid them. But Nashville looks really rough out of the gate right now, and the
Oh yeah.
Rangers are well ahead of them. And I am a firm believer that it is not always the best team that wins the Stanley Cup. It is the team that peaks at the right time. And the fact the Rangers are starting higher than some of those teams, it gives them the opportunity to be better than some of those teams. Of course, you have to realize that, you actually have to climb the mountain as opposed to just looking at it.
Sure.
But the Rangers are at a good starting point, and they have a little bit of room as far as some of the young guys where they want to play them, if they want to defer to older guys, whether they want to do Ruedel or Jones, and how many starts they want to give Jonathan Quick, how fresh you want to try and get Shesterkin for the playoffs. But the good start, it doesn't guarantee anything, but at the very least, it gives you a strong foundation. And 2 years ago, they spent the entire year trying to get their footing under them. And it really took a while. And it never really all the way came together. They did go something like 9-5-1 in that stretch between the Lindgren injury and the end of the regular season. That was kind of the best hockey they played, but it never felt right. It never was that convincing. And right now, Shesterkin, power play, and the third line, it's enough right now. Panarin's got 14 points points in 5 games, playing out of his absolute mind.
He's been
And
fantastic.
he's not even playing that well when you
Yeah.
go under the hood, because everything we said about them last year about how they give back so much on the other end, it's still true.
It's
They
still
are
there.
giving back
Oh
a
yeah.
ton defensively,
Yeah.
but they're winning those minutes because Shesterkin's got a 97 save percentage, a 970 in their minutes, and they're
Yep.
scoring on like 14% of the shots on goal. So you can live dangerously if you got the
Sure.
guys. And Lafreniere, all everything I just said about Panarin out of the gate too. And that's what makes that line dangerous, because Panarin has the third most scoring chances, individual scoring chances on the team. That gives Trocheck and Lafreniere more space. And it's what we've clamored for 2 years. Was Panarin let it fly, open up space for other guys. And last year, that was the case. It was the second best Rangers forward season of the 21st century, behind the Yager one, where he should have won the Hart, but ultimately didn't. You probably couldn't make an argument for Panarin winning the Hart last year, but on the periphery, and they are back to what was working. Now, they got to iron out the defense, but I think that'll get rectified with time, because you got 3 new pairs. I know
Yeah.
these guys
Yeah.
have all been on the team for a while, but they haven't played with each other before. So let's give that
Right.
time, because we all agree the defense is the team's weak link. But I think what we've seen from Fox Miller so far is very encouraging. And if you get Lindgren back, that opens up opportunities as well for what you want to do with the rest of your guys. But on paper and the results so far, you should feel pretty good.
My fear is this. My fear is Linger comes back, and let's give Laviolette, the a little bit of runway here. Let's say he keeps Miller with Fox. Let's say he keeps Truba with Schneider, and it's Lindgren and Jones, Lindgren and Mancini, Lindgren and whoever you want it to be. My worry is that they lose one game,
Yep.
and then Lindgren is back up with Fox, and then they win that next game, and then it's Lindgren Fox forever again. That's my biggest fear when it comes to these pairs, because
I mean, we saw it last year in the playoffs.
we did, yeah.
At the end of the regular season. Yeah.
Yeah, like these new pairs are working so far, especially Schneider Truba. I mean, they've played well together. I mean, it's not, they're not winning Norris trophies together, but they're playing a lot better than what Miller and Truba have played. And through 5 games, they've looked, like a relatively reasonable top 4 pair. And the concern is that as soon as there's one loss or one tweak, it's back to Lindgren, Fox, and Truba, Miller, and it's Mancini, Jones, or Jones and Ruedel, or whoever. So, or Schneider, Jones, and insert 7th defenseman here. But that's my biggest concern when it comes to the defense, because you want to give these new pairs some runway. You want to give these guys some time, because, like you said, I mean, these are essentially the same guys, but they haven't, like, Miller hasn't played a lot with Fox. Truba hasn't played a lot with Schneider. It takes time to not only get comfortable with somebody, but to learn each other's tendencies and to learn how to communicate well. This isn't an overnight process. So the biggest fear for me is, like I said, if there's one mistake, or if there's one bad game, all of a sudden it's back to, we'll just go, we'll just use the six defensemen in the same pairs that we've used for the past 3, 4, 5 years, and we'll call it a day, because that's what we're used to. Even though that's not the most ideal situation, because as we've seen in the past, we have a lot of stats to prove that those pairings don't work.
No, I mean, we see this line of thinking traditionally with coaches. The Rangers did this. The Rangers had their best defensive results last season, the month that Truba and Lindgren were both out. When Jones was playing every game, the Rangers had really good underlying 5-on-5 results, especially on the back end. And when they brought Truba back, it was originally going to be him on the third pair with Lindgren at points, and it was Jones at points, but there was no doubt in my mind that Jones was better than Truba last year. And during the playoffs, I firmly believe,
Yeah,
if you just pull Truba out and you put Jones in there, they probably win at least one more game in the Florida series and get to a game 7, because Truba's implosion in, I think it was game 4, is ultimately what undid them in that game. But
the funniest part about that, I hate to cut you off, but the funniest part about that is I think it was Micheletti, and I want to say the very first home game of the season, he was talking about Trouba and playing in the playoffs and how he had a bad ankle and how he's a worrier, all these things. And we talked about this for the past 4 months. It's like, okay, first of all, he was allegedly healthy because he said so. After it was all over, Jacob Trouba was like, "Oh yeah, my ankle is all healed." And like, brother, you had it out. You had it out that your ankle was destroyed, and that's why you played so atrociously. And then you threw that out the window because you said you were fine. And now the spin zone of Joe Micheletti saying, "Oh yeah, he was a warrior in the playoffs because his ankle was bad," is again hilarious because you know
Continuity error.
yeah, first of all, continuity error for sure, but also, it goes back to our philosophy of if you are not even remotely healthy, you should not play in the playoffs. I don't care if you're a warrior. I don't care, if the guys want you to play. If your ankle is in 100 pieces because it's shattered, you being out there on the ice is a net negative on this hockey team, whether it be for the Rangers or for anybody in any situation. If you cannot skate, how are you going to positively impact your team winning the game? In what world? I don't care that you're a warrior. You can't skate.
And we see this, and it's not just the Rangers. The Oilers found really good defensive results in the playoffs. The games they played Darnell Nurse 15 minutes a game. The solution to these problems, it's right there in front of you. You have it. You don't even have to do this in like the abstract or the hypothetical. You saw the results when you played your worst defenseman fewer minutes. And I understand that so much of how we talk about defensemen playing defense is perception based. The idea that someone's good at killing penalties because they're on the penalty kill, or someone is good at defense because they play against the other team's best players. Just because they do that doesn't necessarily mean they're good at that. And I think it's a really easy trap that people fall into. Oh, well, if he's out there against the other team's best players and he kills penalties, he's got to be good at defense, right? But when you watch in the abstract, the decision making, the positioning, the technique, Trouba gets over his skates a lot where he's leaning forward and all his weight is on his toes. So he can't get backwards and react. It's why he's always reaching stick first, because all his weight is forward. If he plays a little more of a neutral posture and a little bit more evenly on his weight, he can cut a little more dynamically left to right or keep things in front of him. But because he leans, because he's reaching to try and prevent, as opposed to using his skating to prevent space, that it creates a self-defeating cycle. And the thing is, it's the exact same stuff with Darnell Nurse. You watch Darnell Nurse, and it's the same exact mistakes Trouba makes, where he engages on a puck battle, he can't win it, so he chases the puck. Because he chases the puck, he lost. He's out of structure. He leaves his partner in front of the net by himself, or he's too passive in front of the net. He takes a really deep defensive posture, allows the opponent to skate at him with speed. He never steps up and forces the puck holder to make the pass or shoot decision, and it puts the goalie in an untenable position. That's why you want that defender to step up and pressure, because if you step up and you play the shot, that means the goalie only has to play the pass, and it eliminates a problem. And look, it's very early to be talking about this in the perspective of the playoffs, but no one looks great out of the gate right now. I know there are some teams with good records. I know like the Devils have a couple of nice wins. They also lost in overtime the other day in a 6-5 game. So I really want everyone to take a deep breath and understand this is a long season. And these opinions and evidence, it'll evolve. The more games you play, the more opponents you play. I think Montreal is a good case study of, well, they beat up on Detroit because they're just better than Detroit. And we know they're better than Montreal on paper and in reality. But can you go out and do it? Are you going to go out there and do it? Or are you going to, well, we'll beat them, we'll figure it out, the way you kind of did the first game against Detroit, where you didn't play great for that first 20 minutes or so, and then you started to pull away. But can you give me something?
Yeah,
And
Montembeaus look good,
he's been great.
and the Canadiens are if nothing else, they're a very fast team.
They do skate well,
which is when you're a team like the Rangers that don't have the best foot speed at all times, that could cause an issue. So it'll be interesting to see how the Rangers counter that. I think, what is it? The game is tomorrow. Tomorrow at 7:15, which is also, of all the like every game starts at like 7:08 ish.
Well,
The fact
tomorrow
that
they're doing the frenzy tomorrow, so they're staggering.
okay,
Everybody plays
okay,
tomorrow, and all of the games are kind of staggered by like 5 to 10 minutes, so
interesting,
that in theory the
right,
studio can go from game to game. Even though last year when they did this, there was more shots of PK Subban and John Buccigross talking than actual hockey. You know, the
right.
whole point of NFL Red Zone is they show you every touchdown from every game. You can't do that for the NHL and then not show me every goal. You know, the whole
Yeah,
point is to show all of the goals that,
I
oh,
agree.
we've got 15 games on tonight spread out over a 3 hour window. So we're going to go to every single game. We're
Yeah,
going to show you every goal, every big save, every power play opportunity. And then why are we doing shtick? Why are we watching John Buccigross eat chicken parm? Can we just watch the games? Like, I understand that
it would be
ESPN,
funny if Ryan Callahan did that.
they've
Shout
done that
by
before.
the way, shout out if you remember that.
Yeah.
That I think it was what
That
2012.
was
That
the
was
that was the Flyers. That was 24/7.
yeah,
That
yeah.
was
That was that
2011.
2012,
That
11,
11 12, 11
11,
12 that
12.
season.
The
'Cause
fact that we know this, like the fact that we're not in a psych ward because
no,
we remember these things is that's a whole different
that's
conversation for a whole different day.
that's the lore, man. You got to know certain things. You got that.
That's right.
You got the tweet from that Sharks game that I can't say because this is a family show. When they scored a goal with a certain word you're not allowed to say on any network, let
Right,
alone the internet.
right.
There's lore out there. But real quick, the one last thing
Yeah,
I wanted to hit on before we get out of here. The Shesterkin thing is going to get worked out, and it's good to see that the only people still talking about it are people arguing either entirely in bad faith or B, people who are addicted to clout. I don't think you need a better example of the internet being bad for your mental health than the fact that Stan Fischler is like 94 years old and he realized, oh, I can get attention whenever I want if I say this in Diary sentiment. And he's well, granted, he's in a different time zone, but it's very funny to see tweets at 3:40 a.m. Eastern time. Oh yeah, they got to pay Rubel Shesterkin over there, right? Oh, he makes a big save against Toronto. The price went up 500 grand. I don't understand the mindset. Like, not to be. Why are you bag watching? Why do you give a shit so much?
yeah.
You've been covering hockey since they played with wooden sticks and had second jobs. You know, you were covering hockey when guys had to work at Sears and Roebuck in the off season. Why do you care that this guy in particular is going to be able to make life altering amounts of money? Like, I get it. A lot of it comes from the sports writer mindset of, oh, well, I am an authority on this subject and I am always right. And I've been around for so long. You are the only person arguing in bad faith. And yes, and I'll make this point because it's important to say if you didn't watch the episode 2 weeks ago, the Rangers are where they are. They do not have the financial options to go another path. They are too down the road. And people say, well, sunk cost fallacy. Well, if you want to punt on the goalie, that's fine, but you got to get a replacement goalie. And you are not going to get an upper echelon replacement goalie because those guys do not become available. They just
Right.
don't. So
Ottinger just signed his extension.
yeah,
Like these guys are not
Ottinger and Swayman
available.
signed their
Yeah.
extension. Bob is probably the best big name free agent goalie to get to unrestricted free agency in modern free agency. And that was what, 6 years ago at this point? I mean, Olmark could have gotten there, but he's not going to be there. Demko is a draft pick. Most of those guys are long-term starters. You know, teams don't let good goalies become available. It's exactly the same situation as quarterbacks in football. There aren't 15 good goalies in the NHL, let alone 32. If you have one of the good 10, you're going to move heaven and earth to figure it out. And bag watching, because for whatever reason, you take it upon yourself to be, oh, well, he's not worth it. They could do just as well with Jonathan. No, they couldn't. If they
No,
started
come on.
Jonathan Quick 60 games this year, they would maybe win 35. And look,
Yeah.
Quick is pretty good for a backup, but the reason he's so good for a backup is because he plays once every 2 weeks.
Right.
If you need a 37-year-old to start 3 times a week for 5.5 months, you're going to have a bad time. I just hate to be that guy because he's been a good Ranger in the 2 years he's been
Yeah.
here, Jonathan
No, I
Quick.
agree.
But
R-
let's be
Real
realistic.
yeah. And real quick here because we got a chat about it from YouTube from the YouTube live stream, and also by the way, we live stream these every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So if you can't catch us now, catch us in the next episode. We'll be live on YouTube at that point. We used to be live on Twitter, but then they removed that
They made that a
option.
premium feature.
They made that a premium thing, and we're not about that. So catch us on YouTube, Liberty Blue Pod,
And Twitch.
and Twitch as well. got a comment from Nvital21. He asked the question I want to ask you because it's an interesting one. If things remain the same, knowing what they have in Ruido, Jones, and Mancini, do you think there's any chance one of Jones or Lindgren gets moved at the trade deadline? The floor is yours.
Um, I Jones I could see. Lindgren, I don't think so. Jones, I could see him being an asset in a trade. I don't think it would be a one for one. I think he would be one part in a bigger trade because I do think he has some value. He's kind of a blank slate, but his archetype is becoming more and more available. The undersized, good skating puck mover who's not great defensively. Yibly, 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 yibly. Go. Okay, there we go.
Okay, we're back. All
Yeah,
right.
technical issues on my end. It was my computer on my end. I had to unplug my USB hub and plug it back in, and everything's fine now. The one
Yeah.
last thing on Lindgren, and the reason I don't think they would trade him in season before we wrap up and get out of here, uh, he's going to play too many important minutes. They clearly think he's a very good defenseman, being that he's ridden shotgun with their best player since they've been on the team together. And look, in an ideal world, I would try. In an ideal world, I would try and trade Lindgren for a forward. I would put Jones in full time. I would keep Miller with Fox, and I would figure out what I was going to do with Trouba and Schneider because I think Jones and his skill set is more valuable than what Lindgren brings. And
I
Lindgren
agree.
does bring some useful features. He's not a bad penalty killer. He's good at blocking shots, but he doesn't have a very high ceiling as a player because his ability to materially impact the game offensively and just in transition based on his skating and his puck skills, it's not better. Jones is better at those things. And I think you can get more out of Fox by giving him a partner who can take some of the heat off of him.
For sure.
The other team knows that if Lindgren gets the puck, he's trying to get it to Fox because Fox is the one who moves it. Lindgren is not the one who moves it. And it creates a tendency, and teams are able to cue in on those tendencies and really break them down. That's what happened to them against Florida last year. Florida just kept dumping the puck in past every single defensive pair. The
Yep.
one mover went back to get it. The retriever would get it, give it to the mover. They would fail to break out, and then Florida would get to work. The Rangers have enough talent where they can be creative here. I just don't think they're going to supersede that because they clearly think Lindgren's better than he is. If they didn't think Lindgren was good,
Right.
he wouldn't have played with Fox for this long.
I think we've reached a point in the natural progression of NHL defensemen that you simply cannot have a defenseman in the top four, really, let alone in the top two, that is so scared of playing the puck
I wouldn't say
that
that.
Ryan
It's
Lindgren
not
is.
scared. It's
I
that
mean,
he just
like
doesn't have the skills. He doesn't have
he
the
doesn't
skills.
have the skills. He doesn't want to do it. Scared obviously is an overt exaggeration, and like I'm not saying he's like literally afraid of the puck, but he doesn't want to do it. He's like you at a certain point, if you're playing in the top four again, let alone the top two, you need to have at least some base level skill set where if you have the puck on your stick, either know what to do with it, or you have a pretty good understanding of how to move it without getting yourself and your team in trouble. And Ryan Lindgren still, he's what, 25, 26. He does not have those skills. And in the modern NHL, you need to have, especially your top two pairing, both having some kind of skill set that lets them get out of trouble with the puck. Obviously, we all know Adam Fox is really good with the puck on his stick. And when you pair him with somebody that literally treats it like it's a hot potato, like Ryan Lindgren does, it creates a lot of pressure on Fox. Why? Because teams know Ryan Lindgren isn't going to skate with the puck. He's never going to do that. He doesn't want to do that. That's not in his repertoire. And that's just not something that teams have to think about because they don't think he's not going to do that. So teams are going to essentially cheat to Adam Fox because if Ryan Lindgren has the puck and let's say he's in the corner in the defensive end, he's going to try to move that as soon as physically possible. If it was Adam Fox, he could maneuver, he could find a way to skate around somebody and then get that outlet pass or find some other way to move the puck out of the zone. Ryan Lindgren does not do that and will probably never do that at this stage of his career. So, and like ultimately, objectively, that's just not how modern defenses are built anymore. You don't have to be a sensational puck mover like Adam Fox, but you need to be confident with it and you need to have some kind of skill set to be able to do it if you're under pressure. And teams know Ryan Lindgren is never going to do that, so they can cheat. And that's a problem for the rest of the team when they're out there because the other team can look at it and say, oh, Ryan Lindgren has the puck. All we have to do is pretend to skate to him and he will try to get the puck away, which causes him to, either not have the best outlet pass or it's not a recipe for success. And that poses an issue when Ryan Lindgren comes back. And yeah, I guess we'll see what happens come the deadline. I don't think they move on from Lindgren, but they might, given the contract situation, given how well the new pairs have played. Now, again, it's 5 games and the deadline is months away, but I'm sure Chris Drury is weighing all options, and I'm not necessarily sure that he's closing the door on anybody that is potentially interested in him.
No, I don't. But ultimately, you don't typically see that. You don't see
No.
contenders trade off roster players in season unless it's in a big trade. On occasion, you get that. On occasion, you'll get the 1-for-1 or the multiple players for multiple players trade. That's more of a vestige of the old NHL, the pre-salary cap NHL, like the Tony Amonte trade where you do a 2-for-3 in the middle of a season, that type of thing to put your team over the top. You see that more in baseball where teams will do the big players for big players trade in season close to the deadline. It just doesn't really happen all that often in hockey. It's not really something Drury's done in his time. His one big player for player trade was Buchnevich for Sammy Blais, which ultimately was a disaster. But I don't think that in particular, I think that being the sole experience he has in doing that tells you that it's just not something they want to do. It doesn't happen a lot to begin with in the NHL, but the Rangers at large, they haven't been in that market because that's not what you do when you're a contender. You don't trade off roster players to try and downsize. You don't try and turn a dollar bill into 3/4 when you're right there on the precipice. When you have to cut salary, which the Rangers do, yes, then you have to start making those decisions. I think we will see more of those types of trades a year or two from now, where they will start to unwind their position and try and create more flexibility to ultimately go after some new bigger name players. But that's not going to be for another 2 or 3 years, more likely than not. But they're well positioned, and that's all you can
Yeah.
ask.
I mean, they're 4-0-1. I think I wouldn't say that Drury is actively looking or maybe even actively listening to potential, Lindgren trades or Jones trades or whatever. I do think that he knows what's on the precipice. I do think he understands how close they've been. And if there's a trade that comes knocking that really, that shakes him and involves Lindgren or Jones or one or the other, I kind of think that if they're going to make that move, this is the year they do it because they've been so close and because There's a lot of money questions coming in at the end of the year. Maybe, I would say that the chance of it happening isn't very high. I agree, but I think it's still moderately higher than it was in the past. Just because, if the Rangers don't make it again, what is Chris Drury's leash in the future? I don't know if he knows. There's a lot of question marks that happen once the season ends. So maybe this is the year where he does something like that, because this is his, this is the black ace that he has up his sleeve. Like, maybe this is the, oh, you thought I wasn't going to do this. Well, I'm doing this because we're all in, and this is what makes the team better. I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, it's 5 games in the season, and the trade deadline is months away. But I think if there's ever a time for Chris Drury to make a trade of this caliber, it has to be this year.
I wish hockey GMs were more creative.
I would agree.
It would help this process, because there is definitely roster player trade to be made here, because you do have a surplus. You're getting decent enough results without who's supposedly a first pair defenseman. I feel like that tells you you're all right positionally. And the fact that you have Jones, you have Ruedel, and you have Mancini. Now, I might not be as bullish on Mancini as everyone else, just because he doesn't have a lot of experience. But at the very least, you have the option, and that's more than the Rangers have had. And I think
Mancini's throwing a wrench into the blueprint the Rangers have had coming into the year, because kind of no one expected him to be here, and yet he's here, and he's playing, relatively well for how inexperienced he is at the NHL level.
I think his skill set gives them pause. I think it's the same exact thing as Zach Jones, where they're worried when he has to play defense. And again, when you ask a fish to climb a tree, you won't get great results. But if you ask them to move the puck and help get from defense to offense, you'll be all right at that. But we'll see. The one last thing I wanted to say before we get out of here, they have options now. This is not like the last few years where they've had 2 or 3 just absolute black holes in the lineup where, look, do they have some lower caliber players? Yeah, but this is not, Ryan Reeves, Vitaly Kravtsov, and I'm trying to think who the fourth line center was on opening night that year. It wasn't Brett Howard. It was someone.
Was it Colin Blackwell?
No, he wasn't a center. That effect, not like last year where you had Bonino on the fourth line to open the season. Yeah. Could you do better probably than Rempe? Yeah. But he's not an atrocity. He doesn't play enough to impact the game that badly. Could you do better than Trouba? Yeah, probably, but you have options. You are starting from a good place, and you can get better. And that's the goal, man. Keep getting a little bit better every week, keep accumulating it. But that'll do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. If you could be so kind before we get out of here, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the show with a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, we hit the 600 sub mark, so let's keep pushing the goal. Ideally, 1,000 by the end of the postseason, but long ways away for both of those goals. Subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know what's impressed you the most through the first 2 weeks of the season. We will talk to you guys next week.